Hey everyone, this is Tony Teaches Tech. I'm Tony, and I'm super excited to be filming this video today because this is the video that I wish existed 3 or 4 years ago when I started working with Django and I wanted to build a website with Python. While that's a fairly easy process as far as development is concerned, when it comes time for production and you want to release your website to the public, there wasn't a lot of information available. It was scattered all over the internet. I was looking for a single source of information that could walk you through step by step how to set up your server for production. And that's exactly what this video is today. I will walk you through the process of setting up Django on an Ubuntu server with an Nginx web server backend and a web server gateway interface. The ultimate goal here is to take the request from the client, pass that to Nginx. Nginx will take it and pass it to a Unix socket. The Unix socket is kind of like a shared space between Nginx and the web server gateway interface. So the web server gateway interface will take that request, pass it on to the Django backend, and then the Django backend will ultimately pass it on to Python. It'll compile the web page and send it right back through that chain back to the client. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot, so I'm going to do my best to walk you through step by step and give you the fundamentals along the way so that you are prepared for down the road. If something does happen, something comes up with your web server, you are at least have a basic understanding of how everything fits together. So if that's something you're interested in learning how to do, let's go ahead and proceed with the tutorial. And just one other thing before we start here, I want to give you a little background information about what we're going to be working with, and it's specifically a website that I plan to release. I'm actually in the process of building it. I'm going to be building it with you here today. It is called Microdomains. The domain name is micro.domains. Okay, it's like .com or .net. It's micro.domains. And we'll be working with that throughout this tutorial. I have already set up my DNS records from the IP address of my web server to point from the domain name to the IP address. So that's already in place. And if you want to follow along with whatever setup you got, I recommend you go ahead and do that ahead of time and set up your Ubuntu server, which, by the way, I have here on my screen. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm logged into the server via SSH. You can see that up here, micro.domains, and I am using a user that I created. This is basically like a fresh install of Ubuntu 20.04. I added a user called uDoms. He does have sudo access, and I think that's about it as far as the configuration is concerned. I did do the apt-get update and the apt-get upgrade, so everything's up to date, as you can see here. And I think with that said, we can get on into the actual tutorial and start executing some commands here. So the first thing is I want to check the version of Python. So we can do that with Python 3 -- version. And we can see that we're working with Python 3.8.5. And, we don't want to use the Python version that's installed in user bin, which is available to the entire system. We want to have a virtual environment for Python to run in, and that will be accomplished with venv. The old way of doing this was virtual env. I think that's prior to Python version 3.3, but since we're working with 3.8, we can use venv. So that's the first thing we want to do. We want to get that package. So we can do sudo apt-get install Python 3-venv, and I'll type in my password, and yes, we'll go ahead and install that, and this will take just a few seconds here. And when we're done, we're going to create a directory with make_dir called env. And just so you know, right now we're working out of the home directory for this user, so now we have that env directory, so we can place our virtual environment in there and any other virtual environments that we create in the future on the server. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make our virtual environment. We can do something like Python 3-m venv, and then we'll give it the absolute path to our virtual environment. So home, uDoms, env, and then the name of our new virtual environment. I'm going to call it MD, short for microdomains. We'll execute that. And when that's finished, we can do an ls. Inside of the env directory, we'll now see that microdomains MD environment. And then in there, we'll have a bin directory, an include directory, a lib directory, etc. We're interested in what's inside the bin directory. We got pip installed here. We got Python, Python 3, and the activate command, which is what we're going to be using to activate our virtual environment. So we can do that with source, and we'll use a relative path here, env, the name of our virtual environment, md, and then bin activate. And that is now activated. As you can see on the terminal here, it's prefixed by md in parentheses. And we can also verify that with which, we can type in which Python. And instead of being located at in the bin directory, we're now working out of our virtual environment. So that's all set up and ready to go. The next thing we want to do is install Django. So we can do that with pip install Django. And just to be clear, we're executing, just like the Python up here, we're executing pip from within the virtual environment. So Django will be installed for the virtual environment only and not the rest of the system. So unless you're working out of that virtual environment, this Django install won't be available. And this looks like it's going to take a little bit, so I'll pause the video, and when it's finished, I'll get back with you. All right, Django has been installed, and now since that's installed, we can access the Django admin command, and it should be on your environment, your path. So you can just start typing that, hit tab to autocomplete, and then we can do start project to start a Django project, project. And we're going to call, for me, I'm going to call my project micro domains. And what this is going to do is just create a directory here with the basic infrastructure of a Django project. So we're going to go inside of that directory just to look around. There's a manage.py file, and then another microdomains directory in here. So let's look in there. And we have a settings file, URLs, uWSGI.py file. We'll be working with a few of these throughout this tutorial. The one cool thing about Django, it's a blessing and a curse, kind of like I alluded to in the beginning of the video. It comes with a server, a built-in web server that you can test out your code changes without, messing with Nginx or Apache or any other web server like that. So let's test that out first, and that's just going to be a demonstration that Django's working, but this is kind of what we're trying to get away from with this whole tutorial. This is not production-ready web server. So to do that, we can do python manage.py run server 0.0.0.0:8000, and this is just like a standard way to set up the server. So we'll go ahead and execute that, and now the server, it's just sitting here waiting for requests to come to, in this case, micro domains, because I already have those DNS A records set up. So I'm going to bring it over a guest window here, and I'm going to type in micro.domains, and that did not work right off the bat. Let's see if we got any requests coming in here. No, it didn't. So, okay, sorry about that. I just figured out what the issue was. I did not put the port on there. So let's go to micro.domains:8000. And now we see some type of activity here. And although this is an error, I did this on purpose to show you that this is what a debug environment looks like in Django. It gives you some helpful information about what's going on behind the scenes. And in this case, it's telling us that we need to edit our settings.py file and add our domain name to the allowed hosts variable. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just bring our terminal window back up here. We'll Control-C to get it out of the test server, and then we're going to edit our microdomains settings.py file. And in here, you'll see just a few lines down, a variable called allowed hosts. It's empty by default. This is where we want to put our domain name. So for me, it's going to be micro.domains. And then we can also do the www version. So www.micro.domains. Okay, so we'll save that, spin back up our test server, open up our browser, refresh the page, and we should see the default landing page for Django, and we do, and that's good. That means that we have tested out Django and it's working, and that's kind of how we're going to start out this tutorial. Just make sure that each individual puzzle piece is working before we connect the dots. So let's go back to the terminal window here, and we'll get out of our test server again. And the next thing we want to do is start working with our web server gateway interface. So in this case, we're going to be using, and this this is a tough acronym. The uWSGI, we're going to be using uWSGI for our web server gateway interface. And the first thing we need to do is to actually install that. So there's some dependencies for this, and we want to grab those first. You can do that with sudo apt get install python 3.8-dev, and if you're using a different version of Python, then you also obviously want to specify that instead of 3.8. And then after this, we want to also get GCC, the GNU C compiler, because when we do go ahead and install the uWSGI package in pip, it'll have to build that, some parts of it at least, from source. So we'll go ahead and do the same type of thing for GCC, and we'll continue with that. And let's just pause the video and I'll come back when this finishes. All right, like 5 seconds later, we're back, and now we want to go ahead and install via pip. So we'll do pip install uWSGI, and in some instances, this might look like it initially fails. You might see some red error text. It'll actually say error, but it'll kind of do a second try, and hopefully in your case it'll finish and it'll be successful. So let's go ahead and again pause the video, and I'll get back with you when it finishes. Okay, we're back, and just like I anticipated, we did see that initial error message, but ultimately it successfully installed, and that's all we care about. So we can continue on with the tutorial here. If you have any idea about why that's the case, please let me know in the comments below. Anyway, like we did with Django, we isolated that, we tested it, and it works. Let's go ahead and try this with the web server gateway interface. So let's just make a simple Python file that's going to serve some text in a web browser. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be using Vim as my text editor. I'll have a tutorial for you about how to do that, but you can use whatever text editor you want. And what we're going to do is just create a simple Python file called test.py, and it's going to have this 3 lines of code, which is basically just going to print out hello world in the web browser when we visit. So let's go ahead and save that file. And again, like I was saying, just to test out the web server gateway interface by itself, let's go ahead and do that with a very simple command, uWSGI --HTTP. We're going to use port 8000 again, and we're going to pass it the WSGI file called test.py, the one that we just created. So we'll go ahead and start up that test server and go back over to our browser, and if we refresh the page, we do see hello world, just like we expected to see. So back in our terminal window, let's get out of that with Control-C, and let's bridge the gap between the Django and web server gateway interface. So we can do that kind of like the same command here, except instead of a web server gateway interface file, let's give it a module. And the module in this case is going to be microdomains.wsgi. And you know, before we execute that, let me just explain why this works. And it will work, but let me just show you what we're working with here. So if we do an ls inside of microdomains directory, you will see a file in here called WSGI, and that's exactly what we're referring to here. The directory microdomains dot syntax and then WSGI. We don't need to put the .py, but that's what we're referring to when we pass in this module. Okay, that's like the entry point into the Django server. So let's go ahead and do that again. We'll type that one more time. So --module microdomains.wsgi. We'll start up that server, and in the background in the browser, let's go ahead and refresh the page. And this time, since we're connecting the web server gateway interface with Django, we should see the landing page for Django, and we do, so we know that that connection is now working. Okay, so that's all good. Whoops, I didn't mean to open the calculator. Let's go out of this with Control-C, and now we can start looking at Nginx. So that's the web server. That's going to be like what's receiving the request from the client, and we can first install that with sudo apt get install Nginx. and we'll say yes, we want to continue, and that'll take not too long. And while that's going, I'm going to copy our configuration file content. So what we're going to do next is create a configuration file for our website for Nginx, and that's at the vim, well, it's at the directory etc nginx sites available, and we're going to make a file in here called microdomains.conf, and I'm going to paste in this text. And by the way, all of these commands, all of the content of all the files in this tutorial is going to be linked in the description below on my blog, so you don't have to type what you see. You can just copy and paste it and change it as you need it. I think that'll help you guys out. So let me just save this file, and I think, yep, I'm gonna have to get out of this. We have to use sudo to edit this file. So I'm gonna paste that in again. I'll save the file real quick, open it back up just so we can see some syntax highlighting. And here we go. This seems like a lot probably, but let me just walk you through it, at least some of the lines here. So this main server block here, you can see that we're listening on port 80, and that's the default port for HTTP. I'll have another video in the future about how to make this be served over HTTPS, but for now, let's serve it over HTTP. The server name is our domain name, and our domain name with www. We got some default settings here, but the thing I want to draw attention to is these 3 location blocks, okay? So we have a location block for media, a location block for static, and a location block just for slash. So these 2 right here, they map to a physical address on the system, right? So this doesn't exist now, but it will exist soon. We'll go through the process of setting it up. Home, uDoms, microdomains, which is our Django project, and then media, same thing for static. Now, this whole part of the tutorial, we're just trying to test out serving static files, which when I say static, I mean images, CSS files, JavaScript files, any non-HTML files, okay? Or like PHP or anything like that. Excuse me. So that's what these 2 blocks do. And then this one down here, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this is the Unix socket that I was referring to earlier. What you need to know for this is basically that this uWSGI pass references this Django, value, but this actually is what's defined up here. So upstream Django, and let's go up here. This is a Unix socket, and this is again another file on our system which doesn't exist yet. We will create that later, but I just want you to know that this is how that is mapped to the socket. Okay, so one other thing we'll point out, and I know there's a lot going on here, but I'll try to make it all make sense. The first thing I want to do is just create this params file, because this is just something by default that you need. So that's in our Django project, microdomains. We need to make a file called uWSGI params. So let me copy that. Let's save the file, and let's make that file. So vim uWSGI params, and let's just get this out of the way. This is, again, just some configuration that you need to do. We'll go ahead and type that in without too much explanation. So we'll save that. And the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we take our Nginx configuration file in the sites available directory and symlink it to the sites enabled directory. Because if you're not familiar, you can have a whole bunch of configuration files in the sites available directory, but in order to make them public or publish them, you need to have them symlinked into the sites enabled directory, and that will allow Nginx to actually serve those websites. So let's go ahead and do that next, and we can do that with sudo ln-s for symlink, basically the same exact path to our configuration file, and we're going to symlink that to from the available directory to the enabled directory. Okay, and okay, so that is good as far as Nginx is concerned for the moment. I want to go back to what I was saying about testing out the static files and the media files. So we need, let's open this up again. We need these two directories to exist. Well, this directory, the media directory, and the static directory, okay? And we need to tell Django that they exist too. And the whole reason we're doing this is because Nginx does a much better job at serving static files. Again, images, JavaScript, CSS, non-PHP, non-HTML, than Django does. So we want to make sure Nginx handles those files. That's why these have separate location blocks. So let's go ahead and take care of those one at a time. The first thing I'm going to do is to tell Django in the settings.py file that the static directory exists. So let's go ahead and go in there. And down here, I think near the bottom, actually, yeah, the very bottom, you see that we have a static URL. And that is what's going to be appended to our domain. So micro.domains/static, and then whatever the name of the image file, the CSS file, that's how those are going to be served to the public. But we need to tell Django about where they exist on our file system. So we can do that with this line of code. It's going to be static root, and this is like one of those predefined Django variables. You can see it in the documentation. And we're basically going to join our base directory with static. So it's going to be, let me show you what that is. So base directory is defined up top. Okay, so there's base directory right here, and it's basically taking the current file's parent, which in our case is home/udoms/microdomains, the root of our Django project. And then down here, we're just going to append onto that static, so that maps up perfectly with what we defined in the static location block in our Nginx configuration file. One other thing we have to do in here is import OS, because we're referencing it down below. So import OS, and that is referenced right here. Okay, so let's save that. And what's really cool is Django makes it really easy to create your static and manage your static files, create the directory and manage the files. And you can do that with Python manage.py collect static. And what this does is it'll not only create the static directory, but it'll copy all of the static files into that directory. So let's go ahead and execute that. And now you see that same exact path that we're working with is here. And we can see that directory has been created there. Okay, so that takes care of the static directory. What about the media directory? This is more for like user uploads. This is where those are going to live. Those are supposed to reside. So let's make that directory manually. And just to test it out, okay, just to make sure Nginx is properly serving these files, we're gonna do we're gonna use wget to get the image at this URL and place it into the media directory, and we're gonna call it media.gif. So let's go ahead and execute that. And it is taking its good old time here. I think I'm gonna break out of that and try it again. I don't know why that's not working. Let me pause the video, debug, and I'll be right back with you. All right, guys, so I just think there's like a small issue with the DNS settings or something on my server, which is not allowing me to get out to the internet. But that's okay. I secure copied the file from my local computer and uploaded it to the media directory, so you can see that here. So let's go ahead and test this out. The first thing I'm going to do is to just restart the Nginx server with sudo etc initd nginx restart. That'll apply the changes that we made to our configuration file. And then back in our web browser, instead of going to microdomains:8000, if you remember, we were working on port 80 with Nginx. So we don't need to specify a port number anymore. And then we can go to /media/media.gif, which is the name of the file. And we can see that show up. That means Nginx is properly serving static files directly from the web server, and Django has nothing to do with it. So that's good. That's what we want. And by the way, if you're curious, this is Google's first logo from back in, I think, 1998. Okay, so let's open up our terminal window again. And as you can see, we've tested out Django, we tested out the web server gateway interface, and we actually connected them to, and then we tested out Nginx by itself. So we're working really good here. We want to now connect them all. We want to make them work together. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're actually in a place where we can test that out right now. We have everything in place where it needs to be. The command to bring that all together looks something like this. Okay, so we have uWSGI, our web server gateway interface. We're going to pass it a Unix socket, and this is a relative path. So in this directory, there is, let me just show you that. Well, there isn't right now, but there will be a socket that's going to be used to communicate from the web server gateway interface to Nginx. This command is going to create that. And then continuing on, the module, like I explained before, this is the connection to Django, so microdomains.wsgi, which is the folder microdomains, and then there's a file called wsgi.py. And you might or might not need this. If test it out with 666, if it works, great. Test it out with 664. If it works, that's even better. And test it out without this whole argument. And if that works too, then just use that going forward. Just remember that going forward. But for me, I need to change the permissions of this socket to 666. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. We have our web server gateway interface running, and what we can do now is go back here and knock off this from the URL, just test out microdomains on port 80. Let's see what we get here, and we get our Django landing page, and that means that our web server gateway interface is connected to our Unix socket, is connected to our Django application, and that is working. That is pretty much the essence of this video. There is more that we have to do, though. We have to make sure that this starts up when the system runs. So we're going to do that. There's a couple steps and configuration options that we can do to make everything stable and work the way we want it to. So let's continue on here. We'll Control-C out of that. And, instead of passing these arguments, and there's more arguments that we want to ultimately add to make this stable, we want to create a configuration file to hold all of these options, and then we'll pass that configuration file into the uWSGI program. So let's go ahead and make that file. We're just going to make that in here. It's going to be called microdomains_uWSGI.ini. And again, you can get this information from the linked blog post down below in the description. And let's go through some of these options. We have the directory that we're working out of, which is our Django root directory. We have our WSGI module. You guys should know what that is by this point. And then we have our Python virtual environment. We're going to enable the master process to be true. The maximum number of worker processes is 10 in this case. The socket, the full path to the socket, we have that here. And then the permissions, the 666, you might or might not need this. It could be a 664. You can maybe get rid of this if it works without it. And then we want to clear the environment on exit, so we'll set vacuum to true. And then we want to have a log file, pretty much all that stuff that you saw spit out on the screen to be logged into a file at this location, pretty much in the root of our home directory. So let's save that file. And now, like I said, instead of specifying all of those options on the command line, we can just specify the ini file that we created. So uWSGI --ini microdomains, the file that we just created. Go ahead and run that. And this actually runs it in the background. So if we do ps aux, we'll see that we have those 10 worker processes up here running. And if we go back to our web server, we should be able to refresh, and the web server is running as it should. So we're making really good progress here. The next thing we want to do is let me just check my cheat sheet here just so I don't miss anything. Okay, we want to work with Emperor, and I'm just going to walk you through this here. This is like a layer on top of the web server gateway interface that kind of detects changes whenever the configuration file changes. and allows those changes to kind of propagate through the system. So in order to do that, let's go into our home udoms env, our Python virtual environment directory, and we want to make a directory in here called vassals. And this is kind of some funky terminology, but what we're doing is basically we're kind of like we did with Nginx, we're going to make a symlink from the ini file that we just created to the current directory. So that is @/home/udoms vassals. So again, just a symlink from this file to where we are right now. Yep, so that looks good. And then if we do an ls into the vassals directory, we'll see that symlinked file here. All right, now we want to test out running the web server gateway interface in Emperor mode. And right now it would be a good idea to reboot the server because these have been backgrounded and this website is still running. So let's reboot the server to kill it, and then we'll come back and run the next command. So we'll pause it, we'll do a sudo reboot, and this will take like a minute, so I'll pause the video, we'll come back when that's finished. All right, we're back, so let's log back into the server via SSH, and I'll go ahead and type my password. And now that we're on, let's do a PSAUX just to show you that there is no website running, and actually we can go back to our web browser and refresh, and we're not gonna see anything. Let's paste that command that we were gonna do before, which is the Emperor. So uWSGI, passing it the Emperor to the vassals directory, and we're just specifying a user ID and a group ID here as www data. So oh whoops, that actually did not work because of this here, this command. So web server gateway interface, what happened? Right, I did not do my virtual environment, so we have to do source and then env md bin activate. Okay, so now let's try that again. Again, this is coming from our virtual environment. That looks good. Let's go back to our website here, refresh the page, and we see the default Django landing page, which is really good. That means everything up until this point is working together, including Emperor, the vassals, the web server gateway interface, Django, the socket, and Python. So last step here, let's make this start up on boot. The best way to do that on Ubuntu is with a service file using systemd. So let's do that, and we can get out of this server here, and that'll take a minute to, or just a couple seconds to stop. What we want to do is create a systemd service file in the directory, and this will be sudo vim etc systemd system, and then the name of your service. So I'm going to call it emperor.uwsgi.service, and this is kind of like a recommended name for this kind of stack. So let's go ahead and create that, and in here we'll paste in the following, which is basically we'll go through line by line, description of the process. We need the network to be kind of running before executing, for our website to work. So that's why we have after network.target here. The user we want to run it under is udoms. Restart always means that if the process is killed for whatever reason, if it's an error or somebody manually kills it, it's going to automatically restart. And the reason we want that is because this is a production web server. In like most cases, we always want our website to be online 100% of the time. So that's why we have that. And then the command that we just executed. So the full path to the uWSGI binary, Emperor, the vassals, and then the user ID and group ID. And then this last part, wanted by multi-user target, that's just, again, some necessary information that you have to have in this configuration file. So let's go ahead and save that. And the first thing we want to do is enable our new service. So we can do that with systemctl enable emperor.uwsgi.service. So what that, and let me type in let me type in my password. Okay, like I was saying, what the enable option does is allows this to start at boot. Okay, and that's essentially why we created the system service to begin with. All right, so to avoid a reboot right now, let's go ahead and start up the process manually. We can do that with systemctl, and instead of enable, we can do start. So we'll do that. And actually, let me just because I know you're just seeing the same thing pop up here, the default landing page. Seems like nothing's happening, but right now, if you recall, nothing's running, right? If we refresh the page, we're going to get a bad gateway error. Now when we start Emperor, the Emperor service, we have to type in our password. Now that service is running, we can check that with PSAUX, and we see our processes are kind of cut off here running. Let's refresh the page, and we see our Django landing page once again. And the way, I guess, to ultimately test this out is to reboot the server one last time, and we'll do that with you. Let's go ahead and do sudo reboot, and we'll wait for that to start back up, and then we'll test it out one last time. Okay, and just real quick, while the system's booting up, I want to show you that the system's offline, nothing's running. It's actually probably better for me to not wait until the system boots up. You can see it's trying to connect, but I don't think that we have. Let's ping micro.domains. We might be able to ping it, but nope, we're not even able to ping it. So as the system boots up, when the network's ready, then this is going to, there we go, we can see our network now. Then the whole systemd service file that we created is going to execute. We're going to start up the web server gateway interface with Emperor and all that stuff. And then we should be able to visit our website in the browser. So let's see if we're ready. We're ready. Nothing else we had to do externally. This is always going to run. And we are pretty much ready for deployment. There are a couple other options, Django options, that you want to set up. So I have a video on that right here. So definitely check that out. And I also have another video about how to set up a free SSL certificate with Django right here. Check that out. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you got some value. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel for more like this, and I will see you in the next video.